It's Michelle from USC Public Safety. So I have a different perspective. I do have family that is in law enforcement with the Sheriff's Department, and I would never wish anyone to get stopped by my brother. He's one of those bad seeds that we know about. And uh, but what I wanted to touch on was Missy's question about that all that extra work. Really, when it comes down to law enforcement, um, the the mental health aspect of dealing with individuals with mental health is really a crutch for law enforcement because the training that you need to help someone having a mental crisis, we don't get. And so that makes it very hard. And that's where a lot of the issues come up. So that was one piece. Now, as far as other people talking about the law enforcement perspective, as far as working with community members, it's got to be a two-way road. Everyone has biases. Not every law enforcement officer is bad. Not every community member or minority is bad. I am a minority. And like I said, my brother's law enforcement as well, too. I would hope people love interacting with me because I'm open to hearing to everything. And like I said, I wouldn't want my own family to interact with my brother. And we have to have those conversations and have the courage to say something to him. I get in fights with him all the time about how he deals with people and individuals, and he's a minority as well. But Sean touched on a good point. I think it does have a lot to do with our mental wellness. You know, how our mental health, are we getting that just a checkup? How are we doing? We see a lot of things. It's very hard to not get jaded in this profession because we see a lot of negative and very little good. Just like you guys are saying, Jewel and Dante, you see a lot of negative on the social media aspect. You don't see a lot of the good, but there is a lot of good. It's not news. You're not going to hear it. They're not going to run that out on social media or on the news broadcast about all the good law enforcement are doing. So I think it has to be a willingness for everyone to understand. Yeah, I have a bias, but I understand my bias. I know what my bias is, and I still got to go into that situation with an open mind to accept what's happening in someone else's life. What's going on in someone else's life completely changes every interaction with any individual we come into contact with. And it's trying to have that in the back of your mind about, well, why are we really here? What's the real issue? What's the real meaning behind this interaction with people? And trying to stay on the positive side. So
Michelle, you said some very powerful things, and I want to extend your speaking time. First off, let's start with your brother. You said you would never want anyone to be pulled over by your brother. Here's the thing that people need to understand. You can be a jerk of a cop and stay on the force because you're not breaking any laws. You're not breaking any laws.
right.
So when you say that you would hate for someone to get pulled over by your brother, or let's say another bad seat officer, and we're going to get into our solution session soon. So maybe that's an opportunity for you all to discuss what I'm about to ask. What do we do about that? Because the profession should not cultivate an environment for that to continue to take place. Because at some point, between the way your brother is and the trauma that we talked about, he could turn into a red line case at some point, right? We never know. But to your point, there's not enough in place to mitigate that from happening or to prevent that from happening. I want to give you an opportunity, maybe not here, but again, in the solution session, to talk about bad C's, as you said, but you also talked about training and the mental health training that you don't get. Could you elaborate a little bit more about that?
So with dealing with people with mental illness, it varies depending on your department and your location, right? The basic course right now is about 8 hours. And how much of that is actually classroom compared to breaks and lunches? So really you're talking about maybe 6 hours. 6 hours of a core basic training for dealing with people with mental illness outside of the academy. So it's not a lot. It's not a lot. And I think it has to be completely reamped if that task is going to stay with law enforcement. Now they're talking about putting out social workers as a law enforcement team. The biggest thing we got to think about when it comes to law enforcement, our officers, when they respond to call, have a gun on their hip for their protection and obviously to to serve the community safely. But going into a situation where you're dealing with someone with mental illness, you automatically escalate the situation just by being in a uniform, having a badge, and having a gun on your hip. So you got 3 strikes against you trying to go in there and to de-escalate a situation. And that's where we run into a lot of issues in the profession across the board. You're going to help de-escalate a situation, but just your appearance escalates the individual.
Yep.
So I don't know what the answer is as far as that. I've seen other states do non-uniform personnel that don't wear uniform, just wear plain clothes, have their duty weapon hidden, and that helps de-escalate a situation, but not a lot of agencies can afford to do that.